Good morning, guys, and welcome to the podcast wherever you are in the world today. I have a fantastic guest from Luxembourg, Damien, and he is an entrepreneur and he is the host of the Macpreneur podcast. He's also a technology mentor and he's got a fantastic camera lighting setup, if you can see, using his iPhone. And I'm really happy to have him on and discuss his work. So, Damien, welcome.
Thank you for having me, Christoph.
Yeah. Briefly introduce yourself, chronicle your journey, and I'm excited to dive into your work.
Yeah, so I'm a technology mentor and I really enjoy sharing my knowledge about technology. I've been really passionate about technology since my teenage years. I'm 51, soon to be turning 52. And I got my first computer in 88. So I was 15 years old. And since then, I was hooked. I feel really privileged to have gone through all those revolutions. So the personal computer revolution, the internet revolution, and then we had the smartphone revolution, social media revolution, and now we are into maybe the fourth revolution, which is the artificial intelligence one there.
Yeah. Wow. And if one thing is what I really love is I love talking to just veterans, seeing this whole change. And what is when you help clients or you're a solopreneur, what do clients come to you for to solve their problem or help them get ahead? What do they come to you for?
Yeah, so I have two main clientele. I have larger enterprises or governmental agencies who need typical help, training help. I teach these corporate people to better use Microsoft Office, which is still the number one tool used
Wow.
today, right?
Yeah.
So Word, Excel, PowerPoint, Outlook. So that's I would say the biggest part of my business, and it's mostly local at the moment. And for solopreneurs, I'm more a mentor and a coach on how to better use their Apple devices. So I really specialize on helping solopreneurs master their Mac computer, but also synchronize things with the iPhone, the iPad, and more. I look at streamlining their processes. So, because nowadays it doesn't really matter if you have a Mac or PC, because most of the things that we do are online, right? But the issue is when we have different online systems separate from each other, so a CRM somewhere, email marketing on the other side, and then we have our bookkeeping or invoicing platform, they don't necessarily talk to each other. And I'm a very big proponent of automation. And I'm using a tool called Zapier to glue all those web services together so that, for instance, when someone fills the form on the contact form on my website, automatically the contact details are copied into the contacts in Google Contacts so that I have the phone number, the address, the name on my phone immediately. And it also goes automatically into my CRM. And whenever a lead becomes a client, automatically I just push a button and all the information goes into my invoicing software. So I just need to log in, create a new invoice, select, and I don't have to type anything.
Wow. And this is all using Zapier, correct?
Yes. So I've
Oh,
been using Zapier for many years now, and I'm starting to work with another tool. There is another one, another big one called Make.com, and it's a little bit different in the interface. So for me, it's a little bit challenging, and the philosophy is a bit different, but the power is there as well. And what I just realized, because I started using it for a few webinars that I organized lately, is that even though they can talk to pretty much the same web services, there are services with which Make has better integration. So we can do much more with Make. We can catch events, so something happening in a web service, and we have many more events for some services. I don't remember exactly those. I think LinkedIn is one example. Squarespace is also another tool that I'm using for my website, and Make has better hooks into Squarespace than Zapier.
Interesting. Yeah. So one thing what I love about is I want to ask you about because you use the whole gamut. You use Apple, Microsoft, and then also AI, which I'm gonna ask you about. But along this line of Zapier, and so automation is the secret weapon of solopreneurs. So if people listening to this and they want to get started with Zapier, what's the number one automation that would just set them forward or save them an hour or two a day in their business?
Yeah, so you can start with Zapier totally for free, and that allows to create what we call a single step Zap, an automation with a trigger. So something happening that triggers the automation and that generates an action. So we can do one trigger, one action, and that we can do totally for free. Yeah, for me, it would be like an example I mentioned earlier, right? So if the listener has a contact form on their website that automatically they get, maybe it creates a reminder or it creates a task to follow up in the tool of their choice, right? The tool that they use every day, that is already powerful because I don't know you, but when I fill a contact form on a website, I'm never sure if I will get an answer, right? It's a little bit like, oh, I hope that they will catch the message. But yeah, simply that contact form filled and then task in your task manager.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. And then we may, because you mentioned you organize webinars and we have a webinar series. So maybe later on you could talk about how to use Zapier. But it's very fascinating how it's like the glue between all these different applications. A follow up question is how can, because you were going to talk about artificial intelligence, but how could someone integrate Zapier with ChatGPT and like what is one simple automation that they can use with artificial intelligence?
Yeah, with artificial intelligence, you can do so with Zapier, you have a trigger, something that initiates the automation, and then you have a series of steps of actions. The AI action is just a ChatGPT action where you specify a prompt, right? So you just you give it a prompt, and in Zapier you can always refer to information that was coming from the previous steps. What I like about Zapier on the interface, it's a vertical interface. So at the top, you have the trigger, and then just underneath action one, underneath action two, action three, action four. And if you are at action four, you can use within your prompt any information that was passed from the previous steps. And so it's a matter of if you already have a prompt that you use often, every time you go to ChatGPT and you type it and then you copy paste something, you can insert a ChatGPT action where you write the prompt once and for all, and you refer the text that you want to be processed, for instance, with your prompt.
Interesting. The next question I have for you is you talk about Microsoft Office, and before I lived during the PC revolution, as that's when Bill Gates that's how he made his fortune. And Microsoft Office was like you had you put in a CD and then it was like now it's all like in the cloud and it's subscription. Why do businesses still use Microsoft Office when Google Docs and is free?
Yeah, I have the impression that here in Europe, where I am, Microsoft has a bigger market share than Google has in the US or in North America. So personally, for my company EasyTech, I'm using Google Workspace. I really love it. I could not imagine having something other than Gmail to process my email with the rules and so on. And sorry, I forgot to close the door. And yeah, and I believe it's a lot of inertia, right? A lot of companies, when they start with Microsoft, and especially now with Microsoft 365, it's actually easier for medium-sized company to manage than the old system, old Microsoft system where they had to have their own servers and so on. Yeah, I think it's inertia in the end.
Interesting. Well, a follow-up question I have for you is the next question I have for you is why is you talk about why Mac is the best platform for entrepreneurs. Why is that?
I believe that it is more stable than Microsoft Windows. That's number one. But also something else, even though I cannot say that Macs are immune to viruses or that necessarily Macs are more secure because there is no real 100% security. I still believe that Macs are easier to secure. So it's easier to configure it. It's also easier to deal with backups and have multiple backup systems on the Mac. And then let's face it, because it has only 10% market share across the world. I know it's bigger in the US, but internationally, it's 10% only. So it's a lower target, right? So bad guys, they tend to go and attack the Windows system first.
Interesting. Yeah, because I know here Mac is like a status symbol if you have Apple. It's because in a lot of it's if you're a creative, it's if you're a YouTuber or it's and plus the aesthetics is a lot better. And I remember when it was like there was like Mac PC compatibility issues, but then you mentioned going online and now everything is streamlined for the most part. So next question I have for you is this: how do you think Apple is doing in the AI race? Because people think that AI or Apple is really behind compared to like Meta, Google, these other companies. So where do you see Apple in this AI race?
So two types of AI, right? There is generative AI, which came at the forefront of everyone's mind with ChatGPT. But then we have general artificial intelligence or I would say even good old artificial intelligence, which is just machine learning, based on machine learning. On that front, Apple actually has done a lot, is already incorporating a lot of AI. So for a few years now, in Photos, for instance, in the Photos app, when you search for an animal, for a plant, this has already been categorized with artificial intelligence. It's not generative artificial intelligence. So that's one thing. The second thing is, I think Apple is still an advantage because nowadays, especially since the transition from the Intel processors to their own Apple silicon chips, those chips, which also are on the same technologies on the iPhone and the iPad, they have what is called a neural engine. So they have inside the chip a part of it that is solely dedicated for machine learning tasks and AI related tasks. And we don't have that on the PC side. And now, today, if you want to run an AI model, a generative AI model locally, the Mac is the best platform. Because on the PC, you need a high-end graphics card, right, from NVIDIA, which costs a lot of money. Whereas every Mac that has been sold since 2020, they have a neural engine with at least 16 cores, and the bigger Mac Studio and Mac Pro, they have even 32 cores just dedicated for machine learning and the neural engine. It's for me, it's the best platform to run AI locally. And so I'm not worried at all. So yes, on the software side or the services side of things, right? Apple doesn't have a ChatGPT competitor. But the truth is, I don't expect Apple to produce a ChatGPT competitor. As long as I can run ChatGPT or Gemini or Copilot or Perplexity from my Mac. And on a side note, I have implemented on my iMac, which is still an Intel Mac, a way to call the OpenAI API, so application programming interface. So I can chat with ChatGPT directly from my Mac. I can right click on text. I can select text on my Mac. I can right click and I can have a prompt and transform text, proofread, grammatical correction directly from my Mac, but just talking with the OpenAI servers.
Interesting. Yeah, and how do you? Because you mentioned a lot of hardware. Because you mentioned like NVIDIA, and then everything comes out of TSMC, and I think there's another silicon up in Europe. Can't remember the name, but TSMC is the main one. And then also with how do you? And you said Apple may not win the software. People are talking about like the glasses and these things. So that may be a potential area where Apple can excel in. So talk about this artificial intelligence. I think it's you talk about revolution or fad. I think at this point it's not really a fad. It's just where it's going to go. So how do you see the area of artificial intelligence playing out? And I'm just curious to hear your thoughts as the Macpreneur and host of the podcast.
Yeah, for me, I use the analogy of cars. So when the car was invented, a lot of people were tinkering with cars, right? And we had to learn how the engine was working. And almost everybody, so first of all, there were many car manufacturers, right? Hundreds of companies manufacturing cars. And the people who were actually the early drivers, they had to be also to learn the mechanics of the car, how the car works and stuff like that. And we are at the same stage with AI at the moment. The only difference is the time span. We're going to be is going to be very fast until like today, right? We buy a car and when there's something wrong, we go to the garage and we get it fixed. And I think with AI, it's going to be the same. So you see a lot on social media, on TikTok, or on YouTube, even LinkedIn, right? People who tinker and go to the really at the edge of what the AI tools can do. But my vision is that in 5, maximum 10 years, we won't talk about AI as we do today. It will just be part of the software stack. So whenever we will buy a new piece of software, it will have AI inside. And we won't even question. Another analogy is like electricity, right? Today, when we buy appliances, then they don't advertise that they are made with electricity. No, no, we expect them to be with electricity. And in the future, we will expect a service, a system to be powered by AI, because we know that without that, it will be less useful.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's going to be, you mentioned cars and again, Uber and then Waymo and Tesla, Robotex. It's going to be, I think in the future, will cars and public transportation, these will have dynamic impacts on the industry, especially in Austin now. We got Waymo, San Francisco. When the robo taxis come out, that's going to be another interesting. I was curious to see. So, final thoughts, and this just with Trump, with China, with tariffs, with NVIDIA, TSMC, the AI race. How do you see Apple playing out? I'm just curious to hear your thoughts.
Apple is in a very strange situation. I've never seen the company in such a precarious, I would say precarious situation, because I understand the motive of Trump wanting to get manufacturing back to the US. The problem is that it takes years to develop a factory to produce chips. And at the same time, it's also totally understandable that the company, so TSMC, wants to protect the IP. So they will be very cautious to put all the latest technologies is in any other country. It doesn't matter if it's the US, it could be in Germany, it could be in France. It doesn't matter. They want to keep their secrets the way that, because the way they manufacture chips at the moment, I don't know if I've seen 1.7 nanometers, right? So we're at the size of atoms. And yeah, for sure, they don't want anyone to be able to reproduce, because in When I grew up, oil was the thing that was the most valuable. I think that chips, computer chips, is what will be the most valuable. What maybe, yeah, what will be the most valuable in the future. And especially, you talked about robotaxi. But for me, the next frontier is what I call embodied AI. So it's the fusion of artificial intelligence and robotics. And that will also require a lot of chips and a lot of expertise and know-how, yeah, in AI plus robotics.
Yeah. Yeah, we're in an AI arms race, and I think China is way ahead of the United States in manufacturing, and now they're offshoring a lot of their manufacturing to Philippines, Vietnam, and a lot of the he's trying to bring manufacturing back to the United States, but a lot of American workers are not skilled enough to for these high tech advanced, and a lot of them don't want to manufacture shoes and clothes. It's gonna be yeah, we're in an AI arms race. So it's gonna be really interesting. And then also you have a risk of Taiwan. China just invades Taiwan. And again, we're probably in a World War III or whatnot. It's gonna be we're living in very interesting times. If people wanted to hear about your podcast and learn more from you, how could they do that?
They could go to macpreneur.com or they could search for Macpreneur in the podcast app of choice. I have actually prepared a small gift for your usual listeners. And it's a topic we haven't discussed at all. But for me, it's about security. So if I understood correctly, this podcast audience is physicians, right? Lawyers, dentists, accountants, people who deal with a lot of personal information, confidential information. And that's another pet peeve of mine on the security aspect of it. And being a Macpreneur, I have developed a Mac security checklist. It's totally free, very comprehensive checklist to make sure that the data that is available through your Mac is protected. So to avoid getting data stolen, but also sometimes the bad guys, they ask for ransom, right? They exfiltrate the data and then they say, if you don't want to pay, I'm going to make this data public. And this checklist is available at macpreneur.com/MSC for Mac Security Checklist. And it's totally free.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming on and really fascinating discussion.
My pleasure. Thank you for having me.
All right.